mentioned in the Book of Enoch. Azazel is a fallen angel who is associated with teaching forbidden knowledge to humanity. Apollyon. In the Book of Revelation, Apollyon is described as the angel of the abyss, associated with destruction and chaos. Belial. Belial is sometimes considered a demon in certain texts, associated with wickedness and lawlessness.
Rumble, YouTube users. I don't know how much longer I'll be on YouTube, but if you want to see the best of Gary Wayne's videos, I already have them on Rumble. All you have to do is go to Rumble. All right, my friends, we're going to be talking about Alexander the Great tonight. Who was Alexander? All right, was he a Nephilim like Nimrod and Tubal-Cain? Did he reach that far? Well, Gary Wayne is going to be able to connect the dots tonight and touch on the subject, my friends. Before we get started, I'd like to do a little pitch of Gary Wayne's book. Gary Wayne's book changed my life. And what I mean by that, my friends, is it opened my eyes up to Nephilim culture. All right? And that's the bottom line. It's a must-have book, Jason Nell. Thank you for commenting, Jason. It's a must-have book, my friends. It's a go-to book. It's like an encyclopedia. All right? So, like I said, go out and get Gary Wayne's book. It's a must-have. All right, Mr. Wayne, we got Alexander the Great tonight. Now, we wanted you to connect the dots. And is there anything that you would like to say about your book tonight before we get started? And if anything else, we'll get started.
Yeah, so glad to be back tonight. Looking forward to the discussion. I think what we're going to be talking about is going to, hopefully connect a few more dots and raise a few more eyebrows in terms of the subject matter tonight. In terms of something I would like to, talk about in terms of my book. And if you're talking to particularly Christians on my book, it's a book written and designed for book 2 specifically for Christians. So whereas book 1 is more of a book how the Bible intersects with all the other testimonies of prehistory, history, and prophecy, and lets the other side speak for themselves so that people get a good idea as to what they believe and what they're going to do with that belief system. Book 2 is more of how the world intersects with the accurate chronology and time frame and of the Bible. And for Christians, it's written specifically for Christians, where the other book is written more for Christian, even though it has Christian biases of obviously a significant slant. It's designed to maybe have people give the Bible a little closer look. So book 2 is what I would call book 1 on steroids for Christians, and it's Dr. Heiser on steroids for people who are familiar with Dr. Heiser's work, and takes it to a whole new level on both accounts of why it's on steroids. And that if you're talking to other Christians about it as to why they would want to sort of jump into this rabbit hole in the Bible, it's about learning about the whole context of the Bible. But more importantly is that I would suggest to Christians that the first 3 sections is essential reading to understand the Bible. And you're going to look through a lens that you've not seen before once you go through and start putting the pieces together with everything the Bible talks about in terms of prehistory, in terms of the fallen angels, the angelic order, the Nephilim giants, the Rephaim giants, the post-Diluvian giants, the hybrids, and how that all came together in the wars of Israel, and provides, I think, indisputable evidence that they're up against giants all the way through, and why they had to remove the giants who were squatted in the land of Canaan. That was God's land that he gifted to Israel, and they weren't going to leave, even though they were asked to leave. And so for Christians, if you want to understand the Bible in a fuller context, that's why you want to read the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. And if you want to understand how prehistory connects to end-time prophecy, You're going to want to read this book because I think this is a very unique book, not only from the prehistory side, but how I connect it into end time prophecy and then how I explain end time prophecy. So I think people will find that it challenges your thought process. It challenges what you may have previously conceived, but in a way that, everybody is on a sort of spiritual road and everybody's at a different level. And so there may be some things that you agree with and some things that you disagree with, but it's really hard to sort of throw it right out the window if you disagree with it when you have all of the definitions and all of the passages right there for the statement that is said. And so it's one of those books that I think is going to have a long shelf life as we get further on into what I think is the fig tree generation. And for people who want to know more about giants, than you can find anywhere, there's more written how many kinds of giants and any other book that's or any other book that's out there. And even from polytheist sources, they don't list these many giants and show you how they intersect with the giants of the Bible.
Yes, sir, Mr. Wayne. Like I say, my friends, Gary Wayne's book will connect the dots for you. It's broken down into small chapters where a person can digest the book. So please don't let the size of the book. That's it's awesome go-to. All right, my friends, Alexander the Great. Who was Alexander? What was Alexander? Gary Wayne's going to help us tonight to connect these dots. And my first question to you, Mr. Wayne, is who is Alexander the Great? Who was his parents? And how was he nurtured into the role that he started into?
Yeah, it's a great question because Alexander is an important figure not only of prehistory and where we start to get some records that we can count on that are written down for history, and that he is the leader of one of the great beast empires that is listed in the book of Daniel and would be part of Revelations 12, 13, and 14, or 12, 13, and 17, as it lists the seven empires that were going to come in this age, and all the while noting that we're waiting for the end time empire, and that Alexander is the king of Greece in Daniel 8. That is giving us another understanding for the seven empires, this time coming out of Greece with Alexander as that king who defeats Persia, and the four kingdoms that it splits up in after Alexander dies, which Rome comes out of, which is the sixth empire. And then the end time empire will come out of the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire extends out of the Greek Empire. And so it's kind of that extension. So you get seven empires that way, as well as with Daniel 7 with the four beast empires. And then you have the two empires before Babylon, which are Assyria and Egypt. And then you get the Roman Empire at the end. So you got four empires, five empires that are listed in terms of the end time empire as the last empire and listed as the seventh, and you add Assyria and Egypt on and you get two. So Alexander is a direct reference to an area we ought to look for an emergence of an Antichrist figure. And whether or not he is the bloodline descendant of that Antichrist, we'll have to wait for the pedigrees to come out if we're around when that happens. But it's important to understand him, and he is described as the little horn that rises amongst the seventh empire, both in Daniel 8 and in Daniel 7, and becomes the eighth empire as is talked about in Revelation 17. So your question is who are Alexander the Great's parents? And we'll throw in, as we add on to that after I explain who his parents are, the mythos that, if true, doesn't really change things a whole bunch, but really puts a slant on how large Alexander might have been. And we're not told that he was a giant, but he's a royale, and all the royales are the descendants of the original Rephaim and Indo-Aryans after the flood. And I go through all of that in book 2 for people who want to dive deeper into how those connections take place. So Alexander has a father named Philip, and he's from Macedonia. And Macedonia is a part of Greece that's in the north. And Thrace, within that region, was the northern region of Macedon. And Thrace was a common understood race of giants in Greek history. And we get Thracians as giants even up into the time of Rome, who are gladiators. Right. And so when you hear about Thracians, these are Scythians and Indo-Aryans and part of the Tuatha De Danann and the tribes of Datanu that the Rephaim interconnect with. And Thracians, they worshipped the war god Mars, and would have been probably an Indo-Aryan name for it before that, and Diana, the mother goddess of the fairies in the Tuatha De Danann, just as Anu would have been the parrot god before the flood for the antediluvians. And Thracians in Greek mythology were the offspring of Thrax, so they're named eponymously after Thrax, the son of the war god Ares. And Ares is also the same war god that spawned Romulus and Remus, that produced the Julia gens for the Roman Empire, which produced the senator families, which produced Julius Caesar, another beast empire, and another Antichrist type figure. So we need to understand that also with the Thracians, that has a connection likely back to Tyrus, as in Ezekiel, just as the Thracian city was named Tyrodesa after Tyrus, and Tyr and Tyrus are synonymous in its use and understanding as well. So we have another intersection into the Bible of that. So understand that the Macedons and the Thracians were giant races of Scythians and Indo-Aryans, with them being either part of the original Thracians or a very much a related race of giants. So that's on Philip's side. And he's a royale that comes out of that whole intermarriage and royale dynastic bloodlines. Now, his mother is Olympias, and she was the third wife of Philip. What's interesting about Olympias is that she comes from very high level, very, very high level bloodlines. Very high level, sorry about that, very high level bloodlines that are descended back to what they call the Herculides bloodline. And what that means is that she would have been a pure blood matriarchal bloodline to start a new dynasty, which Alexander would have been slated to start a brand new dynasty, except he doesn't have children that are going to succeed, even though he's going to have some children. But anyways, Olympias is descended down from Hercules. And I cite in book 1 how that sort of goes back with some of the major sort of players in Greek history, like Neoptolemus, Escus, and Caranus, that all lead back to Hercules. And just as Hercules produced many tribes, this is one of those branches of tribes that Olympia comes back from. So the Herculides kings are the Gyges kings or the Gaies king, which were tyrants, one of the definitions for Nephilim. And that the gods were also known as bulls, so were the offspring as bulls. And so you have bull, bully, uh, tribe of giant and giant for Nephilim. And you would apply that to the Indo-Aryan giants and to the Rephaim giants after the flood as well. And the Gyges kings include kings like Gog and Magog in that Gyges line. And they had dynastic kingdoms in Assyria, in Asia Minor, throughout southern Greece, and obviously connected to the other Greek empires and bloodlines that are this bloodlines of giants, in this case, a matriarchal bloodline married to Philip to start a new dynasty for Alexander as the son. Now, what's interesting, though, is it's the mythos that goes with Alexander, is that, according to Plutarch, Philip saw Olympias, his wife, sleeping with a serpent. And the serpent was the Amun god. And so the serpent would have been a seraphim angel, a fallen seraphim angel. And that if the mythos is true, according to Plutarch, then Philip isn't the bloodline, but this is a brand new giant from a son of God, a fallen angel, and the head chief god of the Egyptian pantheon, and a matriarchal fairy queen to start this new dynasty and part of the whole mythos. So whether that part's true or not, most people don't want to acknowledge that aspect of it, but that's, Plutarch's one of the great historians, right, out of Greek history. So it's something we want to look at, that it's either an allegory for his serpentine bloodlines, and perhaps because Herculides is a son of Zeus and Alcmene, which is the Cretazens of the royal bloodline of Zeus, maybe it's an allegory for that. But what's interesting, though, is that Alexander is raised in the Egyptian or the Amun worship and religion by Aristotle, a student of Plato, and both were adepts of Egyptian philosophy. And so he's raised in that whole manner. And then when he's in Egypt, he's initiated at the temple of Amun, and the priests, according to the legend, greet him and with this as a quote: "Welcome from his father Amun to the temple in Thebes." And so it's very, very, very interesting who this individual was. So we're not told in history he's described as a giant, but all the kings of that time were giant-like, just as the Aryan kings are depicted in some of the wars with the Greeks in movies these days, and the Persian kings are depicted as giants. And I think we might want to look at Alexander as one of these blonde-haired giants versus the Aryans as being dark-haired giants. And he had blue eyes, so he would have been like the blonde-haired, blue-eyed giants like the Tuatha De Danann, even though there's also a part of the Tuatha De Danann, or the tribe of Danu, or the Detanu, that had red hair and hazel eyes. This is another branch. And so blonde hair is generally this look of where we get fair from, just as with the hazel, or the hazel red-haired ones, and pale skin as well. So those are the parents as it's listed. So I gave 3. Pick any one that you choose, but all aspects lead back to a specific lineage from a royal giant, the offspring of a celestial mafia godfather. And with the mythos, you get that directly from a fallen angel and Olympias. But either way, you get to a Rephaim, a giant after the flood.
So I just clarify this. He was taught by these great teachers. I mean, this guy, he was well groomed. That's what I'm getting at. I mean, to be taught by Aristotle and these other guys. I mean, it's just so amazing. You know, Alexander the
He was,
Great.
as the mythos goes, he was born to be the ruler of the world, and he believed in that destiny or fate, and that he was groomed from the beginning to do so because of the pedigree and this new dynasty that's created, whether it's through Philip or through Amun. It's a new dynasty that is going to be one of those individuals, like Nebuchadnezzar, you know, like
Yeah.
um, like
Well,
Cyrus, like Julius Caesar, that could bend the world to their way and create a world empire. So he
do
was
you think?
groomed from the
I'm
beginning for
sorry.
that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Gary. Do you think that he made it like Nimrod? You know, our Holy Bible tells us. And do you think that did he make it to that status of becoming a Gibbering or a mighty one?
Yeah, I think he was. I think he was born one. How
He
tall he
was
was
born. Yes.
uh,
Okay.
could be arguable. There's an interesting passage in Josephus that talks about giants as we've discussed them in Alexander. And Josephus recorded accounts about Scythians, Gog and Magog, giant tribes,
Yes.
also called the Elan, as he describes them. It's a division of them, and I talk about the Elan in great detail in Book 1, that were going through Alexander's iron gates. And Josephus also referenced a Porus or a Peoras, or a relative thereof, and also a king of Medes, which is one of the Aryan Persian kings, and that these Elan, they go through the gate and they go through and they raid and defeat the king of Medes and plunder him because they're just of such great powerful size. What's interesting as well with that name Porus is there's an author in the Middle Ages that writes several books, and in book that I list some of those books in Book 1, but in Book 2 I list this book. And this is a book called Gargantua and Pantagruel by a fellow by the name of Rabelais. And he wrote that there is this lineage of giants from Goliath who eventually gets down to Porus, who fought Alexander. So
Right.
Alexander is fighting this giant, according to this story, and we get sort of an understanding that that's possible through Josephus's writing, that's connecting the same giant, and that there's giants amongst these Gyges and Herculides giant tribes, and that um, this accounting is also written about by Pliny in Rome, who was uh, writing about a giant named Gabera, who's also talked
Right.
about in
Right. 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 Oh,
Pantagruel, right? And
right.
Gaborus is a son of Porus by the sounds of it, and he's said to be 9 feet 9 inches tall. So not as tall as Goliath, but he's in that zone of that 10-foot zone. And whether or not that was done on a cubit of 18 inches or 21 inches, we don't know. If it was a royal cubit, that would probably have made him closer to 11 feet tall. Would have been the same size as Goliath, and exactly the same size as Goliath.
Mhm.
And that Porus towered over Alexander, but Alexander could have been taller as well, and maybe this giant was taller as well. But no matter what, Alexander would have been large. He could have been 8 feet tall or 9 feet tall, and this giant would have, measured on a 21-inch cubit, would have been still towering over him. And that the Greeks marveled at the size of this giant, but some people would disagree and say, well, his height was an exaggeration, but we see this movement to downsize the giants at every avenue so that we don't sort of wake up and understand what they're talking about. So it would appear that he fought a giant, and it would be not unusual for in the Greek history of warrior kings or just the warrior like Achilles or somebody else to go out and
Yes.
do a duel, just as Goliath and David fought, so that they wouldn't have to fight the war. So I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence leaning towards Alexander being of quite a stature, which would have made him not only royal but this great warrior king, because most of those warrior kings had, height advantage to do so. And just as King Saul was selected by the Israelites because he was a full head, neck, and shoulders above any other Israelite, and they wanted a king like all the other nations. In other words, they wanted a giant king and a warrior king to defend them like in other nations. And I think we can make that sort of apply as well.
Yes, sir. What about his lineage? Did he have any children? Do you know of? And does his children survive today? If so,
He would have slept with a number of women.
yes.
We do get records of at least one child being born through a Persian wife that he took after defeating the Persians. But it said that child was killed after Alexander was killed, so they wouldn't have a successor. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't ones that survived, because people around a great king like that would go to great lengths to try and ensure that his bloodline would continue. But we don't have that that I found, so that we could trace that back, because a lot of people think when they look at Daniel 8 that he would be a bloodline descendant from Alexander, as we mentioned earlier. But unless there's records that just haven't surfaced yet, waiting for this Antichrist to come, it seems unlikely. But we ought not to be surprised if they take a pedigree, true or false, back to Alexander because of Daniel 8.
Amen.
So there's another interesting thing.
Go ahead.
There's another interesting thing that I think people should be aware of in terms of how Alexander was described. And he was understood by the Persians as being the accursed, hostile spirit that's related to the end time showdown between good and evil. And understand that the Persians had the Zoroastrian religion of good versus evil. And I think that was the Indo-Aryan religion that was before, the Indo-Aryans would be the people that people from Babel would have migrated to in Greece. And so they would have inherited that religion but used a language of their own for the names, just as the Etruscans were the Indo-Aryans before the Romans got there, and that the giants are there because Babel is 101 years after the flood, and all of these giants are described biblically as aboriginals. So he has that in polytheist understanding, a connection to the end time. So the end time religion is going to be polytheist. It's Babylon. It's the ancient religion that crossed the flood. That's what I like to call Enochian mysticism, that was created by Enoch, son of Cain, Enoch the evil. And that there are other accounts as well, in terms of, like with the Quran, in terms of how Alexander is described. And he's described in the Quran as Du Akarnaim, or Arkanaim. And that's interesting because it means the two-horned one. And so after he was initiated and crowned in Egypt, the bull cult, he was crowned and wore two horns. So that's probably why he was understood as Karnaim, or Karen in the singular for horn. Karanaim, I am as that male plural. That would be the same as like the Vikings sort of helmet would wear, right? And so that has a connection biblically too, because that's a Hebrew word. And some people might say, no, it's more Semitic, but we have a Hebrew word for that. And it actually shows up as Karen which means a single horn, just as you have the single horn in Daniel 8, and that word horn goes back to Karen, and just as it goes back in Daniel 7 to Karen, and that Karen is also understood as a mountain, and this sort of double crown, a double horn crown, is kind of understood as, you know, the two of the peaks of Mount Hermon, and or two cities of worship. So in Mount Hermon, you had Edrei and Ashtaroth, which were the cities of King Og, that were the holy cities of the Baalim, as the Ugaritic text talks about. And King Og is a Rephaim created by the Baalim after the flood, by Baal and Anat, who created Rephaim according to the Ugaritic text. And in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, you have the Rephaim located at Ashtaroth Karnaim. Now that word Karnaim is the plural of Karen for horn. So it means literally the city in Bashan means the city of two horns, or the two horned ones. So now you have this two horn understanding of both King Og, who's reigning over those two cities, and of the two horned Alexander, and connected back to Mount Hermon, that is, according to the Ugaritic text, the ones who created pretty much all of the giants after the flood and had them all report to the assembly of the Tanu at Mount Hermon. And so you have another giant and this bull cult, because the bull cult has those two horns, and that's generally where the sun disk, which is the other aspect of that antediluvian religion that Enoch created, the sun worshiping religion, and the bull cult that I talk about in book 1. You have all of that symbology both at Mount Hermon, where even the second incursion would have occurred in that area, and likely at Sodom after the flood, and Gomorrah before the flood, as I talk about in book 1, and that this is the same imagery that is in Egypt. So you get this sort of coming together of this two-horned one, in terms of how he is crowned, and he rises up amongst the 10 horns as the little horn that the unicorn imagery starts to intersect with, that King James had substituted for wild bull.
Yes.
And I think it was more for his mythos that he had that word changed. It probably should have been translated as wild bull versus unicorn. But unicorn is one of the angelic beings that I get into detail on as an allegory for a cherubim, as part of his coat of arms, as well as the lion. So there's probably a reason for that, and I think that's probably the reason he's taking his genealogy back to his celestial mafia godfathers, two probably different lines in there that were scion together. So Alexander, in whatever presence, is going to have an impact on the end time, whether it's just part of the mythos, or a descendant, or somebody's going to be perhaps saying, I am Alexander the Great. But we're also going to have false antichrists as well. So we want to be aware that we're going to see multiple antichrists in the end time. So it's one of those pieces of history I think we need to understand the pedigree of antichrists. And Gog, as we talked about, is going to show up in the end time. Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. Gog is an offspring of an antediluvian giant, as is Magog of the parent god Iapetus. And yet you have giants named Gog and Magog after the flood, just as you have giants like Gilgamesh named after giants that were around before the flood. So Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, is a different one than Gilgamesh in the Enoch Book of Giants. So there are giant connections that are directly related to the royal bloodlines, one expects a pedigree from the Antichrist to go back to that bloodline and their dragon Messiah. And in this case, that dragon Messiah, understand that dragon is another word for a seraphim angel, a heavenly angel, that the mythos says that he was born through Amun and Olympias. But either way, Zeus is depicted in his original format as a seraphim as well, as a serpent-faced god of Mount Olympus after the flood. So either way, look for that dragon Messiah imagery to be connected in the Royal bloodlines. And Royal means kings of God. Al is a transliteration for the Hebrew word angel, which is L. Al is a transliteration, just as Il or Ilu is, and Allah is the feminine format of that.
That's right. Thank you, Gary, for connecting them dots for us. Gary, we have a question from John Bear Rapp. And the question is, Gary, what is your thought on how the Nephilim got to the Americas? And do you think they sailed, or do you think the original, it was all one land mass? Continents.
Yeah, so I'll start with the latter because I think that one's a little bit easier. It doesn't really matter to me whether or not there was originally one land mass. I know in science there was this continental drift. So you get then from a biblical basis or a scientific basis, you get into philosophical arguments of how long it takes to do that and when did it happen. Biblically, we get some connections to the time of Babel and a dividing of the lands or the dividing of the continents, depending on how you want to understand that. But you also have a dispersion of the peoples into the nations at the same time. So I'm not convinced that there was just this one landmass after the flood. I think there may have been initially, once the waters receded in Genesis 1, and then maybe there was a drift there, or God separated the land into masses. I don't think that happened after the flood, but I'm not sort of doctrine on that. I don't think it's necessarily important. I think we have to remember that when we look at like the Lord of the Rings, when they show Middle Earth, that's one landmass. That may be a polytheist concept that has been tried to be overlaid into the Christian and monotheist understanding, and that that is also understood as Middle Earth as one landmass before the flood. And so therefore, how do we get the continents from a polytheist perspective? That would happen after the flood, or maybe it's the flood that caused it, and all of the earthquakes and everything that came along with the catastrophes that split it. I'm not real big on taking a position on that one. I could go either way. I kind of lean against it, separating after the flood, maybe at the time of the flood, but that would be the closest I would get to that. And so how did the giants get to North America? I think you get different waves. Obviously, before the flood, you would have had giants, but after the flood is what this reference would be, I think. That's being asked. So you have right after the flood, according to First Nation accounts, this white snake clan that the Hopi talk about, and they're talked about in other tribes as well, that came from this island continent after the flood to settle North America, and they were giants. So you have early giants at that point in time, and they're known by different names. And some people look at them as also part of the skinwalkers as well. Now, skinwalkers you have to be careful with, because that's a term that's applied to both the gods, who would be depicted as standing on the earth and their heads reaching the clouds, and that the giants weren't that big as the offspring that they created, which would have similar meanings to the cloud watchers as well, right? So just as you have titans of heaven in Greek mythology, titans of the earth with Atlas and Hercules, just as you have the Nephilim as the fallen ones, of the Shemaim, the heavenly ones, and their offspring is the Nephilim. You have the Anunnaki of heaven, the Anunnaki of earth, and Watchers and Sumerian. That's a standard understanding. They have different names. So, but we also get, and those are typically were, red-haired and blonde-haired giants that came as part of that invasion. But we also have other invasions that happen, 1,000 years later or so. And I think what happens is you get giants being pushed out of the covenant land by Israel, and ones that are also dominating and very heavily populating the Phoenician Empire, who sailed all around the world looking for precious metals and things like that. And I think that understanding of the continents around the world, the timing of the Exodus, and giants being pushed out of the covenant land, I think you get those red-haired ones that are more predominant in later accounts of giants, and as the First Nations describe them as pretty much all red-haired giants later on. So I think there's two different waves that would came, and both though were understood as enemies of the humans. But also remember, even in the First Nations, they have bloodlines of the chiefs, and so it's the same system and the same four-class system that's set up. So there would have been intermarriage and a takeover of the upper two classes of the shaman level and of their chief level to dominate the early civilizations. Then I think you get this wave of red-haired giants that show up afterwards, that the First Nations people are doing wars even up to 100 years ago.
Yes.
And in some of the cases, they destroyed many of them by catching them in their caves and then blocking it and setting it afire and killing them that way.
We got a question from John Bear Rapp, and he's asking, thank you, Bishop, and question, but he wants to know about George Washington and where does he play a part, and was he trying to become a Nephilim too, Gary?
Well, I don't know how he could try to become Nephilim unless
he was doing a lot of
he had some
rituals and stuff, right in plain sight with the Masonic Masons.
Well,
he wore the apron.
He was of royal bloodlines, fairly far removed, but of the nobility class and of the bloodlines. He was a Freemason adept, no doubt. And Freemasons dominate armies and the military as part of the Freemasonry movement's agenda for the New World Order. That and politics is their agenda. And most of the founding fathers of the U.S. were Freemasons or Rosicrucians, a higher level in the whole hierarchy. So he would be of the bloodline. He would have a gene that would go back to a specific patriarchal Rephaim, and probably even back to a specific Celestial Mafia godfather. So depending on the royal bloodline and the coat of arms, you could start to get a closer look at it if you could find his coat of arms. But the nobility elite that was over in North America, they were either of a distant bloodline or they were let's say son number 7 or something that was sent to the new land to impose their authority over there. So he could have been of more pure bloodline, but I've not really done any research to take him back to which royal bloodline. But as with all presidents, one would think he's linked back into the Plantagenet, which is the junior offshoot of the Anjou, because most modern presidents take their gens back through to the Plantagenet, and they're of the blonde-haired variety of giants.
Okay. Mr. Wayne, just scroll this comment box just for. I've heard this And I've heard others throw this out there. I'm just going to throw it out. The question is from Jason, and he's asking, is Barbara Bush Alice Crowley's daughter? Have you ever heard anything about that?
Well, I've heard a lot of people say that.
Yeah, me too.
I
I've heard
don't
a lot of
know
people
whether
say
it's
that.
true.
I
I've
don't
not
know. I
researched
don't know
that.
if it's true or not. I have no. Okay. All right, Jason. That's a tough question.
Well, and you know, so,
Go ahead.
so Crowley is a Rosicrucian. Crowley is a Rosicrucian. So
Whoa.
technically a higher bloodline and authority than what George Washington would have been. He was
Wow.
the leader of the Golden Dawn Order, which was a Rosicrucian one, and he was had antichrist tendencies and wannabes, making contact with what he said was Horus, and some people will name some other gods and names and descriptions, but essentially his understanding was of Horus. And so you know, the Bushes, they were intermarrying to and working the New World Order agenda, and by marrying females, they would be ennobling their bloodlines for the work that they did. The reward for the lower bloodlines is to intermarry with more pure bloodlines to create a higher position for yourselves in the next generation, providing you continued to support and you could move up in that hierarchy of the culture. So it would make sense that she was of a bloodline of some sort, whether or not it's related to Aleister Crowley, and he takes his bloodlines back to Ireland, and the Tuatha De Danann is where his bloodlines come from. And I have some of Crowley's bloodlines. If people want to get a hold of me, I can send them the document on Aleister Crowley.
Wow. You know, ladies and gentlemen, Gary Wayne is connecting the dots here on this channel. So if you like what you hear, please like, subscribe to this channel on Rumble. You YouTube users, please like and subscribe on Rumble if you like what you're hearing. All right, Mr. Wayne. I have some other questions about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, do you think his body was ever found like they say they found Nimrod and Gilgamesh's body? Did they find Alexander's tomb? Have you ever heard of any such knowledge?
I have not heard that. At least the U.S. found Alexander's body. I would think that either, you know, the Roman Church or the European bloodlines would have looked at that as very prized, and if they did find his body or his tomb or his grave, then that they would keep that in secret until they were ready to make that connections to the end time. I have no legends or mythologies or research that suggest that the body, you know, has been found and kept. It was in typical Greek culture and particularly with the kings and the royals and the warriors, is to burn the body after the death.
Wow.
And so unless something was done that was similar more to the Egyptians, because he became an Egyptian pharaoh, then his body, if that would have taken precedent, then his body would have been embalmed, and that body would have been taken back to Egypt and put in with some of the tombs of the kings. And that would be more likely as to how the body would be found, or that people know where it's located and aren't going to bring that information out until the proper time. That would be, you know, just my deductions as how that might connect into end-time pedigrees and the mythos coming back. Because let's face it, Alexander is probably looked upon in polytheist culture, which sponsors secular culture, as the greatest king that ever was.
Yes.
And they, the greatest, most beautiful one, the one who was unmatched in war. And I mean, he was created, he was looked upon as a demigod status in the West, and continues to remain that way. So if there was a possible way that they were able to save the body through the Egyptian connection, then I would expect to see something like that in the end time. Now, if he was a true firstborn giant, then he would be part of the terrible ones, and his spirit would be in the pit prison that would be coming before the midpoint of the last 7 years, when that pit prison is opened in Revelation 9.
Yes. Gary, we only got like 10 minutes left or so, but John was wondering, what are your thoughts about King Charles and the painting that they just did for him? Did you see that
I
painting?
think he's John. Yeah, I did. I think John's, if it's the one that John is referencing, is all those different red colors in there, right? In this some sort of modern type of art thing. So, I mean, if we look at him as being the Prince of Wales beforehand, and that Wales has the red dragon on it, and that he has Antichrist or bloodline as Antichrist as one of the bloodline rivals, for him and or for his son, let's say William, who would take over for him. We see that red dragon show up in Revelation 12, not only as it's shown and understood as the devil for Satan, as the red dragon, but also for the uh, the end time empire, and these are the empires of the dragon, and it's called the red dragon in Revelation 12, and that they have dragons and serpents as part of their coat of arms. And so I think what they're doing is they're taking their bloodlines back to a seraphim angel, and whether or not it's actually Satan's bloodlines or not, I don't think so, but some people do. I think he's making that clear connection, as the head of the English Commonwealth, that he has, dynastic intentions, just as King James did, who connected himself to Alexander through the unicorn changing of the word from wild bull. And he is the unicorn dynasty. Well, you'd have Scion bloodlines also in there, with Prince Charles of the Stuart dynasty, and particularly with his offspring, because Diana on her mother's side was a bloodline of the Stuarts. So, and you would have other bloodline intermarriages in there as well. So he's one of the contenders that people say that he could be Antichrist. I think he's too old. I think it's more likely his son, but it's the house, right? It's the bloodline that's important. So they're part of one of the dominant European bloodlines, like the Anjou are in their junior offshoot, the Plantagenet.
All right. We got a G Shell. Shell's asking, ask him if he knows anything about Zamizal. Oh, yeah, Gary knows a lot about Zamizal, but we've talked a lot about it, him and Azazel on this program. But would you like to tell him who Zamizal is?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways of pronouncing it. A lot of people might say Shamyaza.
That's Zamizal.
So that is an angel. Yep. So that is an angel. That name comes out of the book of Enoch. And it seems to be a title more than a name. And most of the angels, and even in the book of Enoch, end with El. So like Azazel, right? Or Uriel, or Raphael, or in the Bible, Gabriel, and Michael. So from the etymological sourcing of this word, it seems like Azazel was split into two different angels in its corruptions as it comes down through history. And this would be a title for Azazel. So Samyaza is a combination of a Hebrew word and a Zen word, or a Zoroastrian religious word, or an Indo-Aryan word, as you take that back. And so Yaza is that word, that Arabic, Indo-Aryan Zen word for an angel or a god. So it would be El. And so Shem is the word that goes back to the same word as Shem in the Bible. And for the men of renown, which is Shem, which can mean famous or infamous. So now you have either a famous angel in its definition, or you have an infamous angel, just as Azazel is the scapegoat in the book of Enoch and has all the sins of the world dumped on him as the sacrificial goat that he becomes degraded to afterwards. And Azazel shows up as that second goat of sacrifice in Leviticus 16 for sins that we're not told what the sins are for. The first one is for Israel's sins, but we're not told what the scapegoat is. That's the Hebrew word Azazel, the scapegoat, just as Azazel is the scapegoat for the sins of the antediluvian world. The other word that Shem goes back to in Hebrew is Shemayim, which is the heavens. And that would be understood not only as plural as the heavens, but as in the heavenly ones. And so it goes dually back. So you have the infamous ones and the heavenly ones with an EL substitution of Yaza. So it looks like a translation corruption down. And so Shem Yaza is thought to be the same angel as Azazel, not only in the title, but because of what makes up that name. Now, if you look at that word Shem Yaza, it has AZA at the end. You actually have part of Azazel's name in there. So you could also look at that as Azazel, or the goat of heaven. Right? So again, everything sort of points back to those are different titles for Azazel as it's come down through its translations into other languages from Hebrew.
Amen. Gary, there's so much information that you put out there. I could easily, I asked you to done a 2-hour show, and I know you would agreed, but there's so much information that goes out there, and in this short period of time, this hour, I'm sure people go back and rewatch and watch it, but it's a lot of information that's been put out here tonight, my friends. And I want to thank Gary Wayne for coming on to the show and giving this information to y'all. My friends, this is a live program, and I want to thank everybody in the comment box tonight, like John and Ashley, Bear 4. Thank you so much. Gary, she's thanking you, and she's saying that thank you for remaining humble and accessible, and her blessings go out to you. And we would.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would say that the information that I'm providing is not my information, so it's information I've been privileged and blessed to be able to learn about and understand, and I'm just passing on information as it connects into the Bible and passing on information that's in the Bible, and that's not my information. So one ought to be humble in this aspect, and I feel privileged to be in a position to do what I do. So I try and keep that in mind all the time, and also to keep myself accessible, because it's all about getting the information out and letting people make up their own minds as to what they believe. And we're all here to understand why we're here, and we need to make informed decisions. We need to make a choice, and no choice is still a choice.
Yeah. Just everybody in the comment box is just tuning in, like from John and others are saying, hey, Bishop, can you tell Gary thank you for us? John Nell is, stating the same thing. And we really appreciate y'all guys comment, because it takes a lot for me to come on air, and I know it takes a lot to comment in the comment box. And I want to thank to those who do comment. I thank y'all, because y'all the ones that make this program. All right, Mr. Wayne, where do they go to get a signed copy of your book?
Well, to get a signed copy from me, you should go to my website. And that's the best way to contact me as well. So that's the Genesis6conspiracy.com. Genesis 6 with the number 6, just as the title of the book is. And if you go to that website, there's a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 and all 84 chapters of book 2. And if you wanted to get a signed copy, you can go to the Buy Now page, and you can click on book 1 if you want book 1, and if you want book 2, click on book 2, and you can put on there who you want the book signed to. And if you have a special signing, just get a hold of me through Contact the Author and say, I'd like to have this, or there's room on there, but typically people will run out of room if they want a large personalized passage or set of words to somebody that they want put in there. But just get a hold of me and I'll do it, because I sign all of my own books, and I don't pre-sign books. I sign books as they come in, so it's pretty easy to do that way. And if you wanted to buy multiple copies, there's discounts for that. If you wanted to buy multiple copies, let's say 2, and you wanted one of each, just go to any one of the books, book 1 or book 2, hit the 2 column, buy 2, shoot me an email through Contact the Author and say I want one of each, and I'll send you one of each. They're both the same price, so it makes it easy to do that. And so if you wanted to buy 10, you wanted 5 and 5 or 7 and 3, that's all possible too, along with additional discounts. And the discounts I provide is just the amount of money I save on shipping more than one book. And so that's how much freight is on shipping books these days. So the more you ship, the less it costs. So that's why I pass on that discount. So that's the easiest way to get a signed copy. And I would also say that on the website, on the Buy Now page, you can also link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and BarnesandNoble.com. And just before I forget, if you're wanting to get a signed copy, if you're in the US, go to the US page. If you're in Canada, go to the Canada page. If you're somewhere else in the world, go to the international page, and that has the different pricing reflected for the freight. And that's how you order. Also on the website, I have a icon connection to the Kindle edition for both book 1 and book 2. Those connections over to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, they take you right to the buy page of it. So it's not just taking you to Amazon, then you got to search. It goes right to the buy page. And I'm currently working on reviewing the chapters as they come through for book 1 for audio. So it's going to be available hopefully by the end of June for book 1 through ACX. And that'll be also I will also put up an icon from the website over to Amazon, but it'll be available on Amazon. Book 2 is slated to be done over the summer and hopefully available for September. And so for people who've been waiting for an audio for book 1 for years, finally we've got somebody who's wants to do it and is continuing to do it. You have no idea how many times it was started and stopped because the project is so difficult for them. And we have a reader who understands apocryphal names and historical names, and it makes it a little bit easier. So anyways, that's the best way to get a hold of me, best way to get a hold of my book.
Amen.
And if you wanted, so if you wanted to get a document, let's say if you wanted, like on Gilgamesh's tomb, just contact me and say I want that document and the links to Gilgamesh's tomb that was discovered.
And Gary Wayne is very good about getting back to you. It might take him a week or so, or a couple days, but I know Gary Wayne will get back to you.
A little longer than that these days. Yeah, I will get back to you, but right now, because of everything that's on my plate, I'm running 2 months right now. I'm trying to work that down to under a month again. Okay. So I had that there up to about 4 weeks ago, but I'll get back there. But just be patient. I will get back to you. I take them all in order. So
The questions are pouring in right now. This is just an hour program, my friends. I want to thank all the people who are asking questions right now. But this is an hour program. This is why I asked you to like and to subscribe. If you like what you heard tonight, like and subscribe on Rumble. You can also see us on YouTube. We have a Facebook group called Seeking Yahweh's Word with almost 30,000 members, my friends. So please come join us. There's like-minded people. All right, my friends. My name is Bishop Holsnback. This is my YouTube channel, my Facebook group, and most of all, my Rumble platform. Please come join us, my friends. Amen, brothers. Can I please pray for before we? I just want to close in prayer, and that's it.
Yep.
Okay. Father Yahweh, Father, we offer ourselves to you to build with us and to do with us as thy will. Relieve us of the bondage of self, that we better do your will and not our own will. And take away our difficulties, that our victories may bear witness over the people we will help today of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Father, there's people out here tonight just heard the name of Yahweh, Yeshua, for the first time. These are the ones that need to see your omniscient power, Father. Put hands on them, heal them, Father, cure them, Father. These are the ones that need to see your power, the ones that are going to cry out to and ask you, Yahweh. Father Yahweh, thank you for all your mighty blessings. You are the beginning and you are the end. Amen, brothers and sisters. Amen. Hallelujah. All right, my friends, I'll see y'all next time. Gary Wayne comes to this channel the third Thursday of every single month. We had to do this show a little bit early, but other than that, every third Thursday, Gary Wayne is live here on this channel. So please come join us, my friends. Amen, brothers and sisters. Amen. All right, my friends. My name is Bishop HOLSONBACK, and this is my YouTube channel, my Facebook group, and my Rumble platform. My friends, I had to take down a lot of movies on my YouTube channel, a lot of Gary Wayne videos. I had to take them off. I'm going to start rebroadcasting more videos back into YouTube. Also, Rumble, if you want to watch Gary Wayne, I got plenty of videos on Rumble. You don't have to sit there and fiddle around. It's there, And what Gary Wayne does is expose Nephilim culture. All right, my friends. My friends, let's talk a little bit about Nephilim culture. All right. What is a Nephilim? A Nephilim in Genesis 6:4 in your Holy Bible states that there were angels. They fell to Mount Hermon and they created a deed. The deed was they had sex with humans. All right. They chose wives. But when they did this, they bore great giants. And this is where David and Goliath and etc. All right, my friends. Let's talk a little bit more about Enoch and who Enoch is. Enoch is seventh from Adam and Eve, Noah's great-grandfather. He didn't even have to die. He was taken up into heaven. All right? So this guy must have been a very, very special guy in order for him to be taken to heaven. And you don't have to read the book of Enoch to figure that out, because your Holy Bible tells you this. But it stops right after that. You know, the church wants you to feel like a sinner. Oh, yeah, you sin. That's not what it's about. That's not what Yahweh wants. Yahweh could care less about your crutches. He's looking at your heart. That's what Yahweh's looking at. Are you building a relationship, a conscious contact? Are you praying, meditating, etc.? This is how you build a conscious contact. All right, I want to thank all that's tuned in right now. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Jimmy, Ashley, and Don in the comment box. Thank you guys. Let's get back to Enoch. He's seventh from Adam and Eve, Noah's great-grandfather. How do you think the books got crossed over from antediluvian time and today's time? If Noah is Enoch's grandfather, I have things of my grandfather's. Most likely, Noah crossed the books over. These are how all the books got crossed. All right, my friends, let's talk about the bad Enoch. Who in the heck is the bad Enoch? Right? Because all this Enoch stuff gets confusing. All right? But the bad Enoch comes from the line of Cain. The righteous comes from the line of Seth. All right? Where did he bear the son at? In the land of Nod? Yes, Don. In the land of Nod. See, in your Holy Bible, tells you that he was kicked out of the garden. Right? And sentenced to the land of Nod. In Nod, this is where he bores a son. Builds a city called Enoch. Right? All right, my friends. I want to thank all who's tuned in. And do check out this comment box. Poor Mountain Joshua. Hey, Poor Mountain. You know, I've known Poor Mountain Joshua for about at least 5 years or more. This man is a seeker. He seeks Yahweh. And this is what Yahweh wants. You know what I'm saying? You care less about your crutches. You know, the church, all they want to tell you is you're a sinner. If you don't do this, you don't do that. That's not what Yahweh says. All right. All right, guys. Much love. And I'll be broadcasting a lot of videos up because I had to take a lot of videos down. But please go and subscribe on Rumble. Subscribe on Rumble, please. All right. Thank y'all so much, and I'll see you next time.